There it is. And today, before we practice, I wanted to say a few words about something that, I don't know, I think at times can be a bit of a frustration in the practice. And that's the fact that there's a lot of repetition. I know I sometimes struggle with this myself. When we sit down and meditate, the instructions are simple, but, we pay attention to the breath. And when the mind wanders, we bring it back to the breath or some other present moment object of awareness. But, something becomes very obvious as soon as we start practicing. The mind keeps wandering. Begin with the breath, and within seconds, we're planning dinner or replaying a conversation we had or thinking about something that happened years ago. And so then we have to bring the attention back to the present. And then it happens again, you know. And for some people, at first, especially coming to the practice, they start to think that it means maybe they're doing the meditation wrong, you know. But in mindfulness practice, this repetition and this kind of wandering and returning, it's not a mistake on your part or even on the part of the practice. It is the practice itself. Jon Kabat-Zinn says the moment you notice that the mind has wandered is the moment of mindfulness. So that's part of it. That moment of noticing is actually extremely important. Otherwise, your mind will go off and it'll just stay there for 20 minutes, caught up in something. And that happens a lot. When the mind wanders, a lot of times we stay lost in thought it could be a long time too. But if we practice, if we're practicing the meditation, something starts to change. We can recognize the wandering and recognize it sooner, maybe. And psychologists and meditation people call this meta awareness, the ability to know what the mind is doing while it's doing it. And where's my mind right now? And every time we notice distraction, a gentle return to the breath or other present moment objects of awareness, that strengthens our ability to actually recognize it and then also to return to the moment. So if your mind wanders 50 times during meditation and you bring it back 50 times, that's not 50 failures, that's 50 repetitions of awareness training. When I was watching some of the Olympics, I became intrigued watching the figure skaters perform what I think are called scratch spins. They stick the toe of one skate into the ice and raise the other skate and spin at such a speed that it becomes like a blur if you're watching them. After reaching their maximum rotational speed, they come out of it and calmly just glide across the ice like nothing. Top figure skaters spin at rates that are like crazy. They're like 340 revolutions per minute during those ice spins. And then skaters can rotate even faster when they jump up in the air because there's no ice friction to slow them down. And they can reach speeds of like 400 RPMs. That's a rotational speed that's comparable to the REMs experienced by astronauts in centrifuge training. If I have even just a little congestion or a little fluid in my ear, I can get dizzy just trying to get out of bed in the morning. So I wondered, like, how do they not get dizzy? And the reason is repetition. Over years of training, their brains adapt to the spinning. And the vestibular system, the part of the inner ear that detects motion, gradually becomes less reactive to the sensation of turning. In other words, their brains learn through repeated experience. At first, the spinning would have made them dizzy, but after thousands of repetitions, the brain rewires itself and the system becomes more stable. And meditation works in a very similar way. Each time we notice the wandering mind and bring it back to the present moment, we're training the brain to do that more and do that more efficiently. And at first, our mind spins wildly in thought. But through that repetition, breath after breath, day after day, the brain learns the pathway back to present moment awareness. The meditation teacher, Joseph Goldstein, expresses this beautifully when he says, mindfulness grows through repeated moments of remembering to come back, not through perfection, doing it right every time, not through having a perfectly quiet mind, but through remembering, just remembering to come back over and over. It's a challenge, though. And just as modern neuroscience explains how figure skaters spin without getting dizzy, neuroscience also confirms this process in mindfulness meditation. Because researchers describe meditation as involving a repeated cycle, focusing attention, mind wandering off, recognizing the distraction, and returning the attention to the present moment. And each repetition of coming back activates brain regions involved in attention regulation. Over time, repeated practice strengthens these parts of the brain. It's clear in the research. Studies also show that experienced meditators have reduced activity in that default mode network, the part of the brain system associated with like just mind wandering and self-referential thinking, which, by the way, often leads to feelings of unhappiness when you just let the mind kind of go. In simple terms, repetition gradually trains the brain to recognize distraction more quickly and then also to return to the present moment more easily. And every return is like one more repetition in that mental training. Every time we notice a thought and gently return to the breath, we weaken the habit of getting entangled in that thought or some thoughts like it. And that's true of emotional entanglements and physical sensations and how we get caught into that. And instead of being pulled into the story of every thought, we begin to see thoughts as just passing phenomena. And repetition makes that shift more possible. But repetition in mindfulness practice doesn't only happen within a single meditation session, it also happens across the whole practice, across days and weeks and years of practice. The brain changes through this kind of process that we often hear called neuroplasticity, the ability of neural pathways to reorganize through repeated experience. Just like a muscle grows through repeated physical exercise, so too attention grows through repeated moments of awareness over and over. And it seems that consistency matters far more than intensity. You just keep repeating the practice of noticing and returning every day or most days, even if you just practice for 10 minutes a day. As we like to say, a lot is better than a lot of little. So repetition is not an obstacle to mindfulness practice. It's the very mechanism through which awareness develops and grows. And over time, these small repetitions accumulate moment by moment, breath by breath. And gradually the mind becomes more at home in the present moment. So as we begin our meditation today, just reminding ourselves if the mind wanders, and it will, simply notice it and then gently return to the moment. So let's do that. Let's practice together. So, when we sit, we'll do some sitting meditation. And, though we always start with just an awareness of the physical posture of the body. And the guideline is to sit or lie down or stand in a stable and upright kind of relaxed position. If you're sitting on a chair or cushion, and sitting relatively still, adjusting your body so that your feet and or your legs are in contact with the ground, so that you can feel the weight of your body being supported. And just allowing your hands to come to a relative stillness or rest in a natural position, with the hands resting on the thighs or gathered together in the lap, or if you're lying down, on the floor next to you. and then lengthening up through the spine, all the way up through the back of the neck so the head's level. Also, part of that physical aspect of the practice, you make a choice to close your eyes or just lower your gaze to the ground to quiet the body and the mind, parting the lips slightly to invite a little release of tension in the jaw and face, and then just breathing slowly and naturally. There's nowhere else you need to be right now because you're here. And now bringing awareness to the breath, bringing your attention to this in breath and this out breath, and just noticing the sensations of air flowing in and out of the body. Perhaps noticing the parts of the body that are moving as a result of breathing, like the rising and falling of the belly or the chest. And choose the breath to become as an anchor point for present moment experiencing. You don't have to manipulate the breath or get a particular kind of breath. Just let the breath move in and out slowly and naturally. And when the mind is no longer on the breath, when the mind wanders off, and it will wander off into thoughts or memories, storylines, planning, projecting into the future. Instruction is not to suppress this, but to notice it and then to return. You could name it if you want. Others planning, but the return is the key. Come back to the breath. And the breath isn't magic, it's just a present moment object of awareness. And we do this each time that you notice the mind wandering. Gently guide attention back to the breath. And doing so with an attitude of kindness and compassion, friendliness, what we mean by when we say non judgmental awareness. And you can notice thoughts or sensations or sounds that are presenting in the moment without getting pulled into them. Or when you do get pulled into them, you can recognize that you are and just come back to the breath. It's not about fixing the attention on one thing and kind of strapping it down or tying it down. It's just about recognizing when the mind is traveling off and starts trying to figure out something or plan something or review something. If you think about the breath as home base, then you might think of that releasing and coming back as returning home. Part of awareness is knowing what's happening, with regard to the practice specifically. It's recognizing when a thought emerges, and something, it's common to maybe name the thought. Oh, there's planning, but not getting caught up in it. Well, why am I planning now when I said I wasn't going to do that? Or what do I really need to be planning? And now you're pulled into it. But it's helpful to recognize. Naming is one way to do that, and then just releasing it without having to understand it or do anything about it, or go stop and go make a note about it or something. The poet Wendell Berry has a nice phrase about that. Whatever shows up, I live for a while in its sight, he says. You just see it. It sees you too, maybe. And then you come back to the breath so that you're not caught up in the storyline or the planning or the regretting. As we bring this meditation to a close, here's a poem by Wendell Berry. I go among trees and sit still. All my stirring becomes quiet around me, like circles on water. My tasks lie in their places where I left them, asleep like cattle. Then what I am afraid of comes. I live for a while in its sight. What I fear in it leaves it, and the fear of it leaves me. It sings, and I hear its song.